Well, welcome everybody to episode one of Al Insights, a podcast focused on founders and their stories. And today we have Eric Lowe of Krado and quite a number of other enterprises that we'll talk about. And just to start off, Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and the studio we're in today?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you again. Thank you again for having me on your first episode. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so this is the first company. This is the baby. This one was built on zero business background and experience. It was pure passion, right? As a kid in my 20s, a musician, I spent a lot of money buying a lot of high-end musical equipment, and then I also worked, or not worked, but used a lot of recording studios in Salt Lake, and I just found deficiencies in them. Right, so usually recording studios in Salt Lake are traditionally just sole engineer owned. So you just have one person running the whole operation, the whole business side, and also the engineering side of it. And then even more niche is they're only good at specific genres. And so you really have to know, like, oh, if I'm going to do this type of music, I have to find that engineer in this valley that can really do it. Or you end up walking away with a product that both of you aren't super satisfied with. And so it's pure just like, oh, I think it'd be cool to have a studio with multiple engineers and maybe having the roles split up. So someone handles the business and someone focuses on the engineering. That seems like a good, uh, you know, evolution of the recording studios. And that was it. That was as much as I thought about it. Didn't think about market demand. I didn't even think about competition. I didn't even think about how much I would charge. Essentially, I just had this space that was already available, and I wanted to utilize it. And my not my recording equipment, but my music equipment. I was like, this stuff sits. I can't play all of this 24/7, so might as well let other people use it and let it. Um, Bring me some income that way.
So some of the recording equipment, not the instruments, there's a high bar for expectations in a recording studio. Tell me a little bit about the journey for identifying the level of quality that was required and your epiphany that maybe you could do as good or better than, the really expensive off the shelf stuff.
Sure. So yeah, especially when I was young, I think everyone goes through this, right? Any new hobby or any new sector you get into, you have a lot of brands, you have a lot of names that people throw out, right? And then you have very high priced items. And so the first thing you do is you go and check it out, and you're like, why is this guitar, $7,000? Like, what makes this guitar $7,000? What makes this guitar 20,000? What makes this microphone 20,000? This one $20, right? So there's a huge spectrum from costs to brands and in audio, it's like a hobbyist paradise of terms of crap you can buy, right? There's just so much stuff, like so many, right? Like just within the guitar world, right? You have guitar pedals, different strings, like so many things, and then within the recording sector, you have plugins, you have preamps, all these little knobs and devices that you're just like, I don't know why this one's better than this one, right? And then with digital, so audio went from an analog world where everything was physical, right?
Right.
Mics, cables, needed all of that, and then went to a digital world, so leveraging computers, and then a lot of that outboard equipment, we call it. So a lot of that audio processing gear ended up on the computer. The cool part about that was it made it more accessible, but
Right.
the crappy part was all of a sudden I could pay $500 and I have like 2,000 plugins, is what we call
Right.
them.
Right.
And now it's like, what? I can't even like spend enough time figuring out. Well, it's like overload, right?
Yeah.
Of just like, this is too much. I don't even know what this is. And then you just kind of start filtering through of like, oh, I recognize this name. Like, oh, okay, I'll like try this one. I recognize that one. And then that's it. And then you kind of get bored. And then a next update comes and here you have like another 300 and you're like, okay, like, so you never can. So it's almost overwhelming. And then really, and then as you learn, you realize you can do a lot with a lot less, right?
Right.
And really what really matters is just the signal chain. So essentially what's capturing my voice, and then every single thing along the way, this microphone, this cable, the digital, uh sorry, blanking right now, the box that converts it from analog to digital,
Right.
and then it gets into the computer, right? And then
Yep.
that's the signal chain right there, and it has a preamp along the way as well. And so as long as that's really high quality, then a lot of the back end work kind of just disappears, right? You no
Right.
longer have to clean up so much audio. You no longer have to EQ so much. You're no longer dealing with all these other things that come with lower quality equipment. And so it was one, getting into that world, spending a ton of money, buying a lot of the high end gear, and then realizing that a lot of the high end gear that it was revered for was no longer high end anymore, right? They were just they're big companies, right?
Right.
Fender's a big company, Gibson's a big company. And when you get to that size and scale, quality usually disappears. And they've gone through a bunch of different acquisitions, and they've changed hands a lot, right? And so their quality is all over the place. Like, yeah, OG days of Leo Fender building stuff, great days, right? And then a company came in, Baldwin, so the piano maker, came and bought Fender at one point, and they
Right.
don't know anything about guitars and
Right.
amps, but they knew things about manufacturing, and so they instill that process in, right? And then all of a sudden those sounds and tonalities of those instruments change. And so it has eras, right? And so when you look at expensive things and collectors, you're looking for eras now,
Right.
and not so much of, oh, I want the newest, Fender twin reverb, because honestly, I'm like, that's probably going to be the worst sound. We're like in the worst era now
Right.
of tonality, and it's because things have gone cheap, right? So my experience was I bought a really high end amplifier. It's actually behind us right now, and it broke on tour. And so then I, at the time, didn't know anything about electrical engineering and couldn't fix amps or anything. And so I took it in and paid, $200. And this guy, all he did was just swap out my tubes. And then, it worked again. But then it shortly, 2 months later, broke again. And I was like, what is going on with this thing? Like, why is it breaking so much? And so I opened it up and then realized, like, oh, vacuum tube technology is like engineering 101. This is like
Right.
really old days of engineering. Like, you literally can hand wire every single point on this board, and it's simple, right? It's not like our fancy chips now where everything's like super small, embedded, and combined. So I learned how to fix my own amp. That was it. It was just like, how hard is this? At least it will save me a couple $100. And if it's breaking every couple of months, I should probably learn how to like handle this amp myself. So I started opening it up, doing that. And then as I was opening up, I started realizing that the components in the amp were really cheap. And the reason I knew this was just because I build a lot. And so I'm always sourcing resistors,
Right.
capacitors, and all those components. And I know exactly the brands these are, where they came from, and they're like bottom of the barrel, like cheap as cheap can get, right? And so that's when I was like, oh, did I just drop $7,000 on this amp for bottom of the barrel components, like cheap as, like, what did I just pay for? And the realization was I just paid for the brand name.
Right.
That's it, right? The amp itself is no longer the amp it was. And so that was actually kind of the last day that I started buying. So I stopped buying name brand products simply because I was like, I'm not going to get that quality anymore. I have to find either old vintage stuff, which requires me to still understand how to reverse engineer, rebuild, and get it all back
Right.
up and running. Or then I started stumbling into the coolest part was a lot of these patents, copyrights have expired. So all of a sudden, I had access to every single amp circuit design that Leo Fender's ever built.
Right.
And then I started stumbling into more and more and more, and then it kind of revealed like, oh, almost every audio equipment today's patents has expired, and all these big companies that are still around, you can build as long as you know how to read the circuit diagram and you can source parts. You can build these equipment now. And so then that's what led me to, start building my own amp. And then that worked. And then I just got addicted. And I was like, okay, what else can I build? Like, and then, started building everything.
What was so the amp was the first thing you built?
Before the amp, it was actually a home tube amp stereo that I built. So it
Okay.
was spec to be equivalent to a Macintosh. So I don't know if you know that
I
brand.
do.
Yep. Right. Expensive
Yep.
home audio amplifiers, what, 15K above. Yeah. And I was like, well, let's see if I can build one. And I built mine for what, $500?
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that in the audiophile world, I mean, that is one of the top tier brands.
Yep. Oh, that was the best, right? Is I'm over here learning as I go. So, with a lot of this, and I didn't have the right. I'm learning electrical engineering as I go, and I didn't really have all the testing equipment. And so for me, it was I would just solder, build, and then 3 months later, you're like, all right, let's power this on.
Does
and
it
this
work?
either blows up or maybe it'll work. I don't know. And for me, it worked.
That's great. Well, I knew growing up, I used to go hang out at the stereo store before I could drive. My parents would drop me off Saturday morning, and I would go hang out at the stereo place, listen to the various clip speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, I forget the computer company's name, but it was when they had those first kind of IBM PCs, and they were the ones that were kind of briefcase sized.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd let me hang out there because I'd write batch files for the guys that would buy them. So you'd have these attorneys and accountants come in and buy these computers, and they're like, "Now what do I do?" And they're like, "I don't know. Talk to that kid." So it was a fun experience, but that was my first exposure to hi-fi and the audiophile equipment because it was such a physical expression of a thing. Like, you used to see the Dragon tape decks back in the day, and see the Macintosh and see the stereostatic speakers and all the other fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when you moved from the amp side of the house, did you start building microphones?
Yep. So so then it led to microphones. Yeah. So right, same thing. There's a huge spectrum from very cheap to very, very expensive. And all of a sudden I had every single design at my fingertips, right? And so what I did was, what's the most expensive microphone?
Right.
And then, that design exists. Okay, let's build that one, right? And so that one was a Telefunken C12 tube mic. And that one actually was interesting because the tube itself has become obsolete. So there's no more, right, vacuum
It's hard to
tube.
find, right?
Yeah, like there's no, right?
Because computers, we started with relays and we went to vacuum tubes and then or transistors and then integrated circuits.
Yep. And so, right, vacuum tube is not really an incentive for anyone to keep making these because the demand isn't there anymore.
Right.
And you can charge a different price point, but yeah, the business model itself it's dying, right? And so these tubes, so the only way to get them is there's just a supply left in the world, and so Telefunken themselves secured like the last remaining warehouse of these tubes. And what was interesting about these ones was the microphone itself only uses half the tube, so the other half isn't used. So if you actually design a pair of them, you can design them intelligently so that each one uses the other half, and so if that half dies, you can just flip it, and so you actually get twice the life out of each tube. But once I found out about that, I was like, I need some of these tubes. How do I get some? And so my way was, I had a friend who the way he made some passive income or some extra income was he would go to garage sales and find old audio equipment and then just sell them on eBay.
Right.
And so I was like, you see these tubes,
I'll take them.
give them all of them to me, right? And so still today, he still calls me and he'll be like, "Hey, I just found like a couple more of these tubes. Like, do you want them?" And we'll test them. And be like, "Yep." And so I'm building up my own little stock of it.
Right.
But that was what's crazy, right? So these tubes are super ultra rare. They sound really, really good. There are other alternative tubes you can use, and I use those actually for when I'm testing just to make sure everything was built correctly, because below that, I don't care, right? I can get that anytime. So I built that one, and that one was pretty complex. So a tube microphone, it's not just like a passive mic like this one where it doesn't need power. So these ones actually need power, right, to power the tube. So you have to build a power supply. And so that's kind of, I don't know, my MO, I guess, is I usually, when I start a project, I kind of forget maybe you should start with a simpler, easier thing to get confidence. And I'm just like, oh, let's just go for broke. And so like the amp, same thing. The first amp I built was like the hardest amp you could possibly build. And I remember taking a picture and there's just wires because it's point to point wiring, right? I
Right.
don't have a circuit board.
Right.
I'm literally being like, I think this wire goes to this one. Are you sure? Let's make sure.
We'll
Okay.
find out.
Yeah. Like, I'm positive. Okay. And then later on, you're like, nope, shoot, it's this one. Let me go and undo that one now and, redo this one. And so with this mic, same thing. It was just building a power supply, building the whole microphone. And then, of course, it worked. But then it had all sorts of weird issues because it uses very highly sensitive capacitors. And what I didn't know at the time was, so everything I do on the electronic side, right, I clean it with rubbing alcohol continuously. That just gets rid of all the dirt, gunk, and everything that can build up. But these capacitors are very, very sensitive to rubbing alcohol and actually can cause leaks in them all of a sudden to appear. And so my mic, it would work. And then, poor Rowan would be using it and he'd be like, it's causing this like whooshing sound. I'm like, a whooshing sound. But it wouldn't happen all the time. And
Right.
so it would just take like 30 minutes and then all of a sudden this whooshing sound would come through. And then like troubleshooting, I was like, how do I even like, you can Google it and people are like, they're talking about these kind of mics, right? They're
Right.
just like, send it in. Like
Right.
they'll fix it, and you're like, well, that's not helpful to me. Like what is like going on? And it wasn't until I was on like a forum somewhere and some guy hinted at the exact same thing. And I finally just messaged him like, do you know what's causing this? And he's like, oh, it's these capacitors, like replace them and that should resolve the problem. And, this is after like, cause I thought it was the tube, right? Cause I'm
Right.
getting tubes from garage, like estate sales. I thought it was my diaphragm, which also is handmade. So that's the other thing is there's only 2 guys in the world that hand makes these diaphragms, like the way they used to. And
Right.
so they have a huge long queue and they also have limited access to raw materials and all that. But anyway, so I was troubleshooting everything, checking every single connection. I'm like, everything's looking fine. Like, I don't see what the problem is. And, and so finally I replaced all those, solved the issue, and I realized like, can't touch this with alcohol, like, and that will now be fine. So yeah. So then I started building those and then just been going gangbusters since.
Cool. So what drew you to, as I understand it, you went back to school and got a computer science degree. Ostensibly, from my perspective, it was because you really wanted to understand kind of the bottom up side of electrical engineering with obviously a hobby interest, but was there a business interest? What was the mental calculus that told you I'm going to go back and invest my time in this?
Yeah, so after the studio, it was always a dream to start a tech company one day, right? But in order to do that, I needed technical skills. And so electrical engineering was kind of the first foray, right? I actually even considered going back to school to get a EE degree. And then I looked at how well my biology degree lined up with that. And I was like, I'm pretty much starting over, like, not doing that. And then, I was like, I'm building whatever I want. So it's like, what do I really need to learn from school to keep propelling, right? And so from then on, as I started building, I started investing heavily into tools and equipment, right? And that I would spend whatever money because I'm like, this stuff can generate infinite amounts of money, right? Like you take good care of these tools, you can build anything forever with these. And so the next thing actually after that was woodworking. So before computer science was woodworking, and that was because of the guitar amps, right? I wanted to build better cabinets.
Right.
And at this time, I was so afraid of wood, right? Like I would use hand saws and I could never cut a straight line. I would get splinters all the time. And I'm like, man, wood sucks. Like I hate working with wood. Like I can't do anything, anything that would happen, right? Like a wood table gets dented or scratched. I'd be like, oh my gosh, like how do you fix this? Like I guess we just dump it and get a new one. And so that's not a great mentality because wood's great actually, and it's very easy to fix and repair. It's organic. And so I ended up meeting a craftsman woodworker, and that's where I shadowed with him for 2 years, and I just helped him around his wood shop, and I built I just gave him free work, right? I was like, whatever you need, I will like help. Every Saturday, I'll come in. Whatever you need help with, I will just
It's
do
like
it.
an old school apprenticeship.
Yep. Yeah. And he taught me everything, right? He taught me everything about woodworking, about how to select the wood, about the grains, all this history behind, even wood, right? Like the old growth wood back in the day is way, way better than our new growth wood these days. And you can even see it in everything, right? You can even see it in just like the framing lumber. Um, and so, yeah, we used every type of tool. And then, finally by towards the end, I was like, cool. So can I like use your wood shop, like, and use my stuff? And he's like, no, like that's too big of a liability. Go get your own stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, I will go buy my own tools. And so that was it. I actually used this place because I had this isolation booth here because this space originally was kind of a band practice space, and so it wasn't a fully operational studio. And so I had this tiny room here that was my wood shop, and I would start building things again, right? And then finally that led to the last skill that I thought I needed, which was programming. So the whole intention was I invested enough. I have all these tools at my place that the idea was I can have an idea in the morning anytime, and then however many hours later, I can actually have a physical prototype of that in my hand working that I can like play with, right?
Right.
And what I kept running into time and time again was coding. Just like, man, like I can solder all this stuff together. I can engineer all this. I understand how to do that. I can make all that. But then when I go to load code in, it's just like I'm staring at letters on a screen and I'm copying and pasting a bunch of people's code. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm not really comfortable with, I just don't understand, right? Like
Right.
I think a lot of people are in that stage, especially with like the Arduino world where just so many templates and everything, you just copy and paste. And I just felt super inadequate. I'm like, I can't do much if like this is my limitation, right? And ChatGPT didn't exist then, where it could write all the code for you. And so with that one, I tried to self-teach myself that one, and I just kept running into the same bottlenecks where I was like, I'm not moving past the same like exercises, and I'm not like at the time tech was very almost magical, right? If you don't
Right.
really understand how tech works, it's magic, right? Like your phone's magic. Like if you don't know, then you don't even think about it. It's like this thing is like got a lot of stuff. And so I didn't even know where to begin. Like I didn't even know what words to use, what concepts to add. Like I couldn't even Google like things that I was like, I don't even know what this is called. Like, what do you
Don't even know
call?
what to
Yeah,
ask.
yeah, exactly. Like, how do you like? I don't even know how it works. I don't even know what to ask. Right? It's all digital, so it's all happening behind the scenes. And so finally, at the company I was working for, they were offering to pay for school. And I was like, well, okay. And then I found a master's program at University of Illinois where they offered a fully remote computer science degree. And the best part, so I looked first at the U, and the U was like, I want 70K and you need to be in person. And I was like, that's insane. Like, what? For 2 years, like a master's program, right?
Right.
And then because my stipend was 8K. I was like, okay, that doesn't even cover anything. And then somehow the Master of Illinois program, they're like, oh, it's only like 10K for us for each $20,000 for Masters in CS. And I was like, done. Like, that sounds good. And then I'm like, what do I need? And it just turned out I just need a couple more math classes and some intro programming classes that I took at some community college somewhere. But that just gave me that discipline and guidance. And then even before I finished the program, I already got a job as a software engineer in the company I was at, right? So I just
Okay.
transferred departments. And that's, when you do it on the job, you learn way faster than you ever will in
It's
school.
immersive.
Yep, exactly. And you're, dealing with real problems
Right.
and real like the new latest tech. And so all of a sudden, yeah, I'm doing a lot of software engineering. So I'm building a lot, spending a lot of time really understanding programming. And then school just kind of was like, okay, like we can stop here or just finish just to finish and get the degree for the degree's sake, but there's no more value provided.
Cool. And you have some patents,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
and those. So you originally got patents when you were working in the world with your expertise in biology,
Mm-hmm.
and have more come to light with Krado.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I have some biotech patents on the diagnostic side, and then yeah, Krado. I mean, that was it, right? When you start a business, everyone's like, "Oh, you get so much bad advice," and now I look back, it's because it's people who don't start their own businesses, and so
Right.
they're just echoing whatever they hear, or most likely just instilling their own personal fears, right? So you hear these things of like, don't talk to too many people about your idea. And now I'm like, talk to as many, like, you have to talk to people about your idea.
Get feedback.
Yeah, you need feedback. Like, that's like the first thing to do. You do not build anything in silence. And then that was the other thing, right? It was like, oh, if you do build anything, make sure you patent it, right?
Right.
And so then I was like, okay, who's a patent lawyer? Lawyers are expensive. And so yeah, for Krado, we got our first patent, and it was just through one of the co-founders, church members. And he's like, oh, like one of my church members is a patent attorney. Like maybe we should use him. And they were like,
Right.
okay. So that was how we got Kratos' first patent going. And then, retrospectively, it's like, oh, we could have waited, right?
Right.
Like we didn't have to push so hard, but it was just bad advice at the time. And it was okay. We didn't, like patents, what, 10, 15K? It's not that much money. And it is good to have. So, yeah, so now with Krado, we have 2 patents that we filed, and I'm sure we'll keep filing more and more as we start understanding more and learning more. But that was, I remember the time I was like, can you file like software patents, right? And at the time, everyone's like, no, not really. Now you can, but now it's like, oh, but if you do, then you reveal kind of like all your secrets.
Right.
So do you want, so it's like, oh, then what am I doing with this patent? And then you find out later on, like, oh, you have a patent, but you don't have money to defend it. So
What's the point?
yeah, the company can just steal it and do whatever they want. What are you going to do about it? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, so I just spent 15K for nothing.
Yeah. Well, it's a feel good.
Yeah.
So we'll step back. So Krado is your current day job.
Mm-hmm.
How long ago did you found the company?
So this one officially took off in 2020, but was in ideation since 2018.
Cool.
So in 2018, the idea was, so this was like the first big year for Bitcoin, blockchain. And this is same, I was still very new to tech and understanding code. And so here I was learning about blockchain, and I'm like, oh, this like decentralized network of storing information sounds really interesting. And then I thought like, oh, this would probably solve like the electronic health record system. And so I thought that was $1 billion idea. I remember sitting actually in that control room in the studio and being like, I have $1 billion idea. And the next day I went and told, and I was like, who wants to start this with me? And I got a couple people, and so we, formed an LLC, and then we started doing research. One on like, what is blockchain? We need to understand that, and then 2, what's going on with electronic health records? Like, why is it so hard to just move a medical record from like 10 feet away?
So then you get mired in your learnings about HIPAA and.
Yep, and then I learned that blockchain isn't necessary, and the problem is nothing with tech, and the problem is just
It's
more
the institutions.
Yes, exactly, and no one wants to agree on anything. And the fact that the VA system is actually a centralized medical record system that you can access anywhere, and it's on the oldest tech in the world. So
It's all Unix based.
yeah, it's like old school, right? And so I was like, oh, okay. We don't need blockchain. And then I was like, maybe we use blockchain to enter it, but the bigger thing is just the players in the space. And so then I explored every blockchain idea we had, right? Almost every idea we had is a company today. And I also found issues with every single one of those ideas that I couldn't overcome. And the biggest issue is just the amount of data you can store on the blockchain.
Right.
And so if you had your entire medical record on there, it would take like hours or days to even like access your entire medical record.
Right.
So we started looking at like titles, real estate titles, right? And then we were looking, and that's even more old school, right? I think Davis County is the only one that's like on the more cutting edge of using technology.
Right.
But everything is still like manually entered. Like there's someone who's just taking these old titles and just reading, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's where we are. Like blockchain's like not even part of the.
It's not even part of the conversation.
Yeah, right now, like we just need to find a better way to like scan these things.
Right.
So then I explored automotive, I explored insurance, rehab, and then really I kind of just started running out of ideas, and even the gumption, like we're like, okay, I don't think blockchain's ready, and we're just kind of, this is like now we're seeing Lipton iced tea getting into the hype of blockchain, right? And you
Right.
see their like stock skyrocket, and you're just like, what is happening right now? And then I was like, this is starting to sound very snake oily, scammy. I don't want to be another company muddled into all that, right?
Right.
And so on my own, the what Krado is today, I was actually just building on the side, right? This is now at the time where I had all the skills under my belt. So
Right.
I had my prototype facility up and running at my home. So I could 3D print, I can 3D model, I can design a board, and I could program it. And so for me, I was just solving my own problems I was having with plants. And I solved it, right? Like I built all this early prototypes of Krado, and honestly, I was done because I was like, my problems are solved. Like I don't need to do anything. And then my wife, Mary, at the time, she sees all the projects I'm in, all the things I keep building, and she's like, I think this is like the one you should pursue as a business. Like, and then and then we talk to people, and a lot of people would be like, oh yeah, we'll love that. And I'm like, oh, you struggle with plants too. And then it wasn't until like one day a founder meeting that my one of my co-founders, Jesse, he put in a brand new lawn, spent 30 grand, and he was pissed because he's like, I don't understand how we're like in 2019 and my lawn is still dying.
Right.
It was brand new. Like they
Right.
had a bare patch of land to start with, and like they still couldn't like
Couldn't make the magic
yeah.
happen.
And I was like, yeah, because I was like, the sprinkler system on a grid. Like,
Right.
what yard is on a grid? And then so that was like, oh, like my tech can kind of help solve that, right? Like
Right.
I can put sensors into parts of your lawn, and then we could turn on different sprinkler heads. And so that was actually Krado V1.
Okay.
Was a smart irrigation system. And I even have this video. I 3D printed a pretty cool sprinkler head, and we had motors in there and everything, and it was controlled by a solenoid. And so you can have a signal from the sensor, sense it, and the sprinkler head would turn on. And then within 5 seconds of hooking up to water, that thing exploded.
So, have you always been into plants?
No. So plants is a new thing for me. Yeah. So I mean, coming back from my molecular biology days, right? I have worked with a lot of different organisms, but plants was never one of them. It was either things you couldn't see or animals. So mice, rabbits, and all that.
Cool. And when you got into plants, is that when you kind of were struggling with your green thumb, and that's where the desire for sensors and input help?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the green thumb. It was more just the humbling of like, I'm like, I can harvest white blood cells from a rabbit, grow that up in tissue culture, and keep that alive. What is up with you? Like, you just need food, and you just need water and sun, is all I thought, right? And I was like, why are you being so annoying? And then that's when I started reading a lot of stuff online and finding a lot of articles online, right? Is just either generic or not helpful at all, just for SEO. And then I would do a lot of it. So I started, just kind of my lab brain activating. I was like, well, let's like figure out what's going on here, right? And so I bought like same three of the same plants, even starting from the same genetic seeds,
Right.
control the environment, controlled all my variables, and I had a little lab notebook that would track everything. And yet my three plants would do all weird things. One would be doing exactly what I wanted. The other two would be one would be stunted. The other one would be delayed, and then a couple weeks, months later, it would like outcompete the other two. And I'm just like, what is going on? The inputs are the same, the outputs are the same. Like, why are you guys showing, and your genetics are the same?
Right.
Why am I getting such different behavior? And then that's when I realized a lot of the approaches we do in plant care is very reactive. So we always measure the runoff. So like when it's time to water, I'll water it, and then I'll make sure enough water comes out of the pot. And then I'll measure the pH there, and I'll measure the TDS to see nutrient levels. And my notebook was kind of useless because I'm like, it's always the same. Like, it's not telling me anything, but I'm obviously seeing three different things right now.
Right.
So something's different, right? And that's when I was needing access to that historical data. And I wanted a sensor that can just stream that data for me so I can look back in time to see like, oh, well, maybe that stunted one, maybe there's a variable that I think I control, but it's not, right? Like maybe it's getting a little bit more light, or maybe it's getting way hotter because it's next to these other two. I don't know. It could be anything. But I don't have data. So it's just a guessing game right now. So then I looked at like what was available, and I bought all the sensors that was available, and they were garbage, right?
Right.
You could literally stick them into like the same pot, 6 different spots, and get 6 different readings. And I was like, okay, this doesn't work. And then all the ones that did connect to my phone were useless because they were only Bluetooth at the time. So it means I had to be there to get the
Right.
data.
Right.
And if
Right.
I
Right.
wasn't there, then the data's gone. And I'm like, that's even more useless. Like, this is like, what is this tech? And then so I was like, okay, well, I can build my own. So I decided to build my own, and I had this very rudimentary app on my phone that you would write like serial commands to it, and it would give you like real-time readings. And so all of a sudden I had all these historical readings, but it didn't make sense to me either, right? Because it's like, okay, like I have temperature readings that go back months, I have humidity readings, I have moisture readings, I have light readings. Is this good or bad? I don't know. And that's when I started hunting for a database that can give me that information, right? Of like, oh yeah, this is the optimal growth setting, and then I can set boundaries of like, if any time it's out of here, alert me, and then I'll take care of it, right?
Right.
And then if it's always an optimal, then these plants should now grow perfectly, right? There should be no more variation. Problem solved. And that's when we really saw the opportunity with Krado. Is a lot of these databases are empty, so they don't have any information on all these plants, and that surprised me actually, like crazy surprised. And we quite have a lot of data on cash crops like corn, soy,
Right.
tomato. We know a ton about stuff like that. But these ones we didn't, and I was just blown away. And I was like, "This is weird. Like, where's all this data? What's everyone been working on?" Right? And I just had this assumption that since plants are kind of one of the first things we studied in science, that we would just keep studying it, right? And then I found out that that's actually not the case. A lot of funding's been cut. And botany departments no longer exist. Horticulture departments no longer exist. They've just been merged into biology departments, right? And then when you
Okay.
look at even research papers, things I was doing on my side in animal models, they're just barely trying in plants, like just a couple years ago, right? And I'm like, what? Like, you're just now trying this? Like, what is happening? Like, what is this huge gap? And then I find out, like, oh, it's just you follow the money at this point, right? Is
Right.
okay, where's all the money going? And then you see, like, okay, what is ag tech been up to? And ag tech's all about the cash crops and just improving the yields and making them more resistant to pests and the
And a
environment.
lot of that's been done with chemicals instead of, I guess, naturopathically, with trying to understand the plants and what we could do with the ecosystem. Is that
Correct. Yep.
okay?
Yep. Exactly. And then I'm seeing advancements in vertical farming, and I'm seeing all this. I'm like, there has to be a this. But then you find out, like, oh, well, the whole light spectrum lighting, that's new, nascent research. We're just
Right.
barely understanding now that parts of the spectrum trigger different phenotypes
Well,
and
until we
morphology.
had LEDs, you couldn't really control it.
Yeah. And then you look back and you're like, that wasn't that long ago. That was only
Right.
like 10, 12, 13 years ago, right? And
Right.
so yeah. So like so then you're like, we're just like finally starting to figure out a lot of new stuff recently.
Right.
And then that's when I saw similarities with the ag tech world and my biotech world, where I get it, right? Like I saw how money worked, how decisions get made, right? You focus on things that have return
Right.
in businesses. And so it doesn't matter and that's the problem is the return of science can't be exactly what you seek for it, right? It has to be
Right.
more exploratory and has to be more curious, right? Like, or else duct tape would have never been discovered. Velcro, none of these
Right.
things, any big science innovations today that we finally figured out how to turn into a product later would have
Right.
never been discovered if your intention was right. And that's how many of those stories have you heard of just like, oh, I want to do this and I invented this weird glue and now it's super glue. And it can fix all sorts of weird things. And I had no intention of figuring that out. And so you see that all the time. And so then in my head, I'm like, this is the same problem that's happening in essentially plant research, right?
Right.
Is we have this focus, this super focus on yield, 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 yield. And the funny thing is even the last 15, 20 years, yield hasn't really improved. And we've dumped billions of dollars into it now, right? And it's like, why is like, stop, right? Like, let's
Right.
stop and pause and think about why isn't this working? And to me, the reason why it's not working is just the approach of research and development is broken, right?
Right.
And I saw that too. I saw how we could start out with a simple idea, make a product, and 10 years later, $40 million later, still not a product, right? And now you're in like a sunk cost fallacy territory. And so, yeah, so that was how I got really into plants.
Well, I think, my favorite thing when I meet a founder is learning about an idea that they had, a problem they're trying to solve for themselves. And then in my experience, that's where the really exciting opportunities come, because if you do a good job of solving that problem, other people raise their hand and say, hey, can I use that? Can I try the thing? And I know that that was something that really attracted me to Krado. Was I had tried, I don't know, 3 or 4 different things on Kickstarter. They were all sub quality. They all broke almost immediately if they ever worked out of the box. And I was like, I've got 2 or 3 plants at work, succulents, air plants, can't seem to kill them. Great. Try to grow some catnip. I've grown from seed, I've grown from baby plant. And, invariably somewhere 3-4 months in, it just doesn't work out. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it shouldn't be that hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a problem. Like we discussed, it was like, well, kind of most of us have this because we're not paying that close of attention to our plants.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, it's by the window, gets a little water. They should be working out.
Well, what do you need? Yeah.
And another thing that was really interesting to me is you started this off as, I want to solve this problem for individuals. And then you have started broadening your perceived opportunity in maybe there's businesses that take care of a lot of plants as a service maybe. And then there's also, the ag tech world, the commercial side. What caused you to transition from the immediate solution of your need and others' personal needs to a bigger picture?
I mean, I think it just starts with, with everything. So with Krado, we did spend a lot of time understanding the business model, really understanding the space we're in. And so we did a lot of research. We talked to a lot of people. And so, but what you saw is like there was a lot of problems in a lot of different sectors, right? From the everyday consumer having issues keeping their plant alive, to learning about the nurseries and the distributors, right? And how they just expect 50% plants dead on arrival. It's just like, that's just normal.
That's crazy.
And I'm like, what? Like, is that just built into your margins? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And then you start seeing and you start understanding the bigger picture of it all, right? Of the ecosystem, of what the critical role plants play in the ecosystem. And then you start looking at a lot of the solutions that we are trying to implement to solve a lot of the climate challenges that we face. And that's when I started seeing these patterns of like, we're thinking about this all wrong, right? We do not want more man-made things to solve a problem that we created. And the reason why it was created was because we removed what was keeping it in balance in the first place, right? And you see this time and time and time again, right? A good example is like the algae blooms in Florida. That used to not be that bad. And so people would think like, oh, it's because the temperature's rising,
And is that agricultural fertilizer runoff?
So it's a part of that. But the really big part of it is the mangroves that used to be there were actually things that filtered the algae. Okay. And they removed it. Why did they remove it? For more beach property. Right. So it's like, to me, it's like, and now, right? So now we have an algae problem. So now you're like, what is the solution for algae problem? And I hear all these ideas of machines, right? Like, we could drive boats, we can use chemicals, we can use all this, we could do that.
Or we can plant more mangroves.
And I'm like, or you could just put the mangroves back and problem's gone, right? And so I see this all the time, and I see this in even the climate change grants that are being, proposed, and this whole concept of, right? And I see the thinking incorrect, because the whole thing is just like, I just want to know what your idea is that can suck out gigatons of carbon. And I'm like, it doesn't matter, because if you actually do the math, none of it actually creates a deficit, right? Because if it's a man-made, so it's a machine, it uses any sort of electronics, it has to be made.
The net carbon imprint is neutral or negative.
Or yeah, like that's the best, right?
Right.
Is because it's going to generate, and then it's not even about. And then the other half is okay. We sucked out carbon. Where are you going to store it, right? That's
Right.
the actually more key part of like, yeah, you have it sucked out, but now you have canisters, and now what are you going to do with it, right? And
Right.
then the ideas are like, oh, we'll build bunkers, we'll bury it, and it's like, okay, every part of
Time
that
shift.
Yep, just like generating more of it, right? Now you
Right.
need machines, and now you're destroying. Most likely, you're destroying more ecosystems,
Right.
and that ecosystem was keeping even more underground. And what are you doing? You're digging, and what does that do? That releases even more carbon just by digging, right? And so it's like, what are we doing here? And that really shifted everything of how I thought about and so with Krado and like ag, so we just started seeing all these bigger problems, and it's more of like, okay, who's like the biggest one, and that no one really understands or even thinking about, right? Just one of those kind of forgotten industries. And so that's what led us to like the plant care as a service nursery sector, is we started learning about that, and we're just blown away. I'm like, wow, like companies that have plants in their building pay this
lot.
much money a month just to have someone come water it. And then, of course, you do the math, and you're like, why is, it's expensive because it's manual labor. Like, this is someone's time.
And the churn of the plants apparently is way too high.
Yep. Yeah, because then you follow everything, right? And so then one of our advisors, he actually owned the biggest plant-producing farm in Australia that served the Eastern Hemisphere. And so they would sell to big box retailers all across Asia, right? And what he was telling me was like they were doing great. They were shipping, things were looking good. But the big box retailers would come back to them and be like, hey, your plants are great. No issues on that end. But our customers just can't keep them alive past 3 days. And we're getting a lot of complaints and returns because they think it's us that's selling them bad plants.
Right.
Can you just pump these full of fertilizer?
Give me a week.
Yep.
Give me 10 days.
Exactly. Can you just give me 7 days? And we're golden. And so he's like, okay, sure. So that's what he did. He started pumping, and that actually increased their COGS by quite a bit.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, no more complaints, right? It was just like, oh, the plant died after 7 days. It must be a me problem, not a
Store problem.
store problem. But just like stuff like that, right? And you're just like, what? And then you figure out, and then you look at the direct to consumer nurseries that became really hot. And those companies have a huge shipping problem, right? And so in Utah, we have a company called Route, and they handle shipping insurance and all that. And so, talked to them about it. I'm like, how big of a problem is it? And they're like, this is our least favorite client. Because we're always over under with them, right? We're always losing money because it's a living plant. Like we're no matter what, if it
Nothing
shows up,
ships well like it's living.
if it has a bent twig, it's
a problem.
It's a branch. Then we're a lot, now we're paying for it, right?
Right.
And then you find out also how expensive these plants get. I didn't know that, right? So when I first got into it, cheap plants. And then you start seeing the collectors, and you start seeing the rarity.
$50, $60, $100 plants.
Thousands.
Okay.
Thousands, right? And then
Wow.
I would go into cactus and tropicals wanting to buy a plant and then walking out with nothing because I'm like, that plant was like $2,000. What?
Well, I guess, and when you start thinking about it, you also recognize it took 3 years for that plant to get in to that stage.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So there's time cost there.
Oh, yeah.
How much money have you raised for Krado so far?
So we've raised 1.6.
Okay.
To date.
And what is your next what's your next push for capital? Like what the timing and how much you think?
So we're raising our next round now. And so we're raising 3. And with that 3, we can really now, right? So where we landed with 1.6 was we stabilized, we designed the product. We built everything. So everything from the electrical to the apps to the back end to even the machine learning. We built all of that on our own. And yeah, like when people say hardware is hard, it is hard. It's not only expensive, but it takes a lot of time, right?
And there's a lot of dependencies because obviously you're not fabricating your own chips.
Correct.
There's supply challenges and integration challenges. And there's the software side of things, because I know one of the things that I was really impressed with the app is the ability to take a picture of my house plant and for it to tell me, well, this is the specific plant, which I assume on the back end you're building the database, so it tells me, or at least the system is becoming aware of, this is optimal light, this is optimal pH, this
Hmm.
is optimal information, so that I can. You tell me it was like you've got it in the wrong place in the house.
Correct. Yeah, and so that takes a lot, right? And so for me, it was also I had to learn a lot. So not only did I learn a lot about business, that side of everything, but even just the engineering side of everything, right? What product design really meant and all the steps that involved, and then finding an electrical engineering firm to build our own chips because we couldn't, or we could use, but off the shelf, our cogs was just too expensive, right?
Right.
And we didn't need all the extra bells and whistles that those come with usually, and so we had to then essentially, specify like all the features we wanted. And I added extra things, right? I wanted sustainability in place. And so I wanted all of our plastics to be 3D printed. I want it to be modular. I want it to be repairable. Because for us, we're chasing after the data. We're not just trying to sell people crap sensors. And so we had to really think, and I had to fight almost everyone except the industrial design team, where they were excited because for them it opened up more creativity, right? They're no longer confined by injection molding tolerances. They can design organic things that 3D printers can print. But everyone else, right, from, I've been a fan of 3D printing since it first came out. And that's been promised to be a future for the last couple of decades. And then I'm like, where are we with this? And then as I try to do it, then I'm like, oh, we're nowhere near this because no one's actually trying to do it.
Right.
And then everyone we talk to stateside, they're like, oh yeah, I can 3D print you one enclosure. It'll be $15. And I'd be like, try $1.50. Like,
Right.
it needs to be less than that too. And they're like, there's no way. And I'm like, then there's no way for you to be the future. Like, you are too far off, right? And then unfortunately we had to go back to China because China was the only country where instead of saying no and having all these excuses, they were actually up for the challenge. They're like, we'll figure it out. And so they did. And we all of a sudden, right, every manufacturer here in the States could not get the price down. We got the prices we want in China. And of course, when we let everyone here know that we did it, they magically
Sharpen their pencils.
They magically plug it back in the calculator, and they're like, "Oh, let me just recalculate." And all of a sudden, it's closer to that price. And I'm like, did you just like, what? Yeah,
What's going on?
Yeah,
here?
yeah. Like, interesting. But yeah, even our packaging, right? The intention of having it be ink free and doing it laser, right? Like, we tested on our end of just laser etching a piece of
How
cardboard.
hard was it to find someone to do laser etched labeling for you? Like, was that a thing?
No, it's not
So
a thing.
you basically had to kind of invent a supplier?
Yeah, or we had. I mean, didn't have to invent anything. It was simple. In my
Get
head, I was
get
like,
someone to do it.
yeah,
right?
exactly. I'm like, here they're like, we can't do that. I'm like, why? Like, you don't know anyone with a laser cutter? And then there, yeah, we just had to find someone that knew someone with a laser cutter, right? And so we finally found a manufacturer. Like, oh, my buddy next door has one. Let me go grab it and we'll try it, And I'm like, that's the attitude I want, right? And same with the electrical engineering firm. A lot of the stuff I wanted, they're like, can't be done, right? So we wanted to transmit I2C data through the USB-C.
Yep.
And to me, I'm like, USB-C, we can do
Whatever.
video, we could do anything, right? And you could charge, you could do all this. Like, that's the whole cool thing about this new port. And they're like, no one's ever done it before. And I'm like, so, like, if it can transmit 4K data, like, it can do some.
We can do anything.
Yeah, it can do some like little bits. And so guess what? We got to work. So it can be done. And so that was a lot of it, right? And even so then after that, so these are the guys just designing it, right? And we haven't hit manufacturing yet. And so then when we finally hit manufacturing, then I'm also hit with the same responses again, like, oh, why aren't you switching to injection molding? And I'm like, it's cheaper, right? They're trying to convince me it's cheaper. I'm like, yeah, sure, per unit cost, but you're not taking into account
iteration,
MOQ, tooling, NRE costs, and then that also creates big shipping burdens, right? Of like, I now have to order like a shipping container full or a pallet full to make, right? And so it's like, it's really not that economical. Unless like, this is the design and we're going to do millions and millions and millions of these, right? And we're never going to change.
And you're not at that stage.
And I don't think we ever will be, right?
Right.
Because as you learn, right, why do we see products with different generations? It's because they're learning and they're
Right.
right. But then to me, it's like, well, they have to buy new tooling every time. And then with the supply chain, you also learn that, oh, when a country shuts down, your tooling is stuck there. And in order to continue, you have to now make a new tool somewhere else, and then you go through the whole process again of tolerances, getting all the little details figured out, right? And now you have another $500,000 tool somewhere else. Or I could have 3D printers, and everyone has. Those are very, very accessible. You can
Right.
get them. They're cheap, right? 20K, 25K tops for one of the higher end units. And you push a button, right? And I get the same thing because we've already optimized it for that machine,
Right.
not for the wherever the machine is, right?
Right.
And so to me, I'm like, that seems like it solves a lot of these other downstream issues that you don't think about and you're not factoring into your costs, right? And so yeah, but then, I'm having to explain that. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I don't need to defend myself. Like, you're my manufacturer. You just do what I want. And like, if you can't do it, then I'm looking for someone else.
Right.
And so that was, yeah. So after that's where we are now is we finally stabilized manufacturing. So this next round of funding is to really start dialing product market fit and, smoothing out all the bugs and issues and then really just getting that manufacturing scale very, very stable so we can just hit our growth stage.
Sure. What are some top roles that you might be looking for? Like the top domain experts or individuals? Like what kind of humans are you looking for now?
So the last one we needed really was someone to handle supply chain, right? So with our manufacturer, it really was a nightmare. So it's been more than 6 months. So since December, so 7 months ago, the manufacturer we worked with just was not capable, right? And that's actually something you'll find is a lot of these contractors over promise and under-deliver all the time, right? They're just trying to get your money in, and whether or not they can deliver it doesn't really matter to them.
Well, you're talking in the sales side, not the operations side.
Yeah.
So
Do we need a pause for that? Okay, cool. Yeah, benefits of being next to a Harley shop.
yeah, we hear the rumble.
Yeah. And then of course they don't reveal how ill-equipped they are until way down the line, until you find out they're like, hey, we've never made IoT devices before. And you're like, what?
That was something I should have known day one.
Yeah, but you said you did,
Right.
and they're like, oh, well.
The sales guy said
We
that.
thought we could figure it out. And so we just had manufacturing issues, right? And then we were also dealing with ego. So the manufacturer, we were getting 70% failure rate. They just cannot make this. And I'm like, I don't know why. This is not a very complex board. Like Arduino boards, like this is the same like size. Like nothing about this screams like crazy hard to do. And then I had teams here in Utah reevaluate the designs, and then they noticed some issues with the design itself, and that could be what's causing this manufacturing issue. So we bring it to our electrical engineering team, and they of course are like, no, we designed it perfectly, there's no issues. And then finally, we met someone who's worked with a Chinese manufacturer very closely for decades, right? And it's at a point where I've learned, I'm like, now when I take referrals for anyone, you have to be willing to vouch for that referral with your blood.
Yep.
If you don't, then no.
It's
right?
not that valuable.
Yeah, because and I've been finding out that a lot of my referrals, the people referring them are now dealing with issues, right? And I'm like, oh, great. Like maybe next time don't just willy-nilly refer these people.
Right.
And that's helped tremendously because one, the communication is so much faster, smoother, and he knows, the trust is there, and so he knows what he can push. He knows when they're like, he knows how to push them to get things done for us, right? And even then, we still have timeline slips, but that's what it's taken to get like this product off the ground, and to find like a because a lot of these guys, they play games, right? And I'm sure more games will appear later down the road as we become more dependent on them. But we looked, and then it was funny because that's just how it works. That's the feeling it feels like when you work with a global someone from another part of the world, right? And then domestically, when we meet companies here, it's like everything. Like they're like, oh yeah, if like it doesn't work, we'll rework them, we'll fix it, we'll stand by our quality. Da, da, da. I'm like, this sounds great. Communication's amazing. Like standard quality's awesome. And then you're like, okay, how much? And then they show you the price per unit. And you're like, this is 20 times more. Like,
Right.
uh,
This is white glove.
I thought 2x would be where we would land,
Right.
but 20x, I can't afford that, And then I'm
Right.
like, I can't be here for that, and so we have to then move back to another part of the country. And then I'm like, who are your clientels?
Right.
If it's 20
Who's paying this?
yeah, and then you
Right.
find out it's like aerospace and healthcare, and you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, their margins are great there.
Right.
And so yeah, so that's been we've learned a lot. Oh, so roles. So sorry. So we're gonna head into the sales and marketing side of this company pretty soon, and so we'll be looking for talented individuals in the area. But I've also been burned by a lot of those people.
Yep.
So for me, it's I'm gonna build it out first, and then I'll know who I'm looking for.
Yeah. I always joke with, my background with doing the CFO work is I always encourage founders, you should use a fractional, kind of up through maybe Series B, because until then, you don't know the domain expertise for a full-time CFO. You don't know if you're going to M&A exit, IPO. There's some areas that you're going to identify that was like this person, they need to have exceptional caliber skills in this very particular domain expertise. And that's really helpful when you as a founder figure out the thing that you need, and you're like, oh, I really need someone that really understands this target audience, and how to communicate effectively, and what do they need to know that's industry specific.
Right.
What is you've got a grand vision for Krado that's kind of beyond getting the sensor out there. So right now you're trying to help people keep, plants healthy and alive. There's consumables business you're looking to wrap around this. Maybe medium term, there's a foray into the greater sensor space. And then there's kind of an adjacent vision of identifying more effective plants. Do you want to, any of those three topics you want to jump on?
Yeah. So yeah, our vision is big, but that's also what keeps me excited and fueled, right? Is it's way bigger than me. And that's also something that I think a lot of founders need is you need to be working on something bigger than you, right? Or else it's challenging and it's hard and your motivation will dry up real quick.
Right.
And then you look for that quick exit, right? And maybe that is why we have these quick exits. It's like that's the long is 3 to 4 years, about as long as you can last in like torment before you're just like, I'm throwing in the towel kind of a thing. Yeah, so ours is big, and the reason why is we see the utility and the future, right? And so we like the way I see the future now is we're really going down a bad path. And that path is very highly automated. It's very consumeristic. We create a lot of damage wherever we go. And I think the best example of this was actually in the latest Avatar movie. Have you seen that yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, anyway, but so the latest one is right. The planet that they're on. The avatars there. They're or not whoever they are that's living there. They're living in harmony with nature, right? And of course, humans, we have destroyed our planet, so we're wanting to consume their resources. And so the first thing we do when we show up is we burn their forest and it becomes a desert, and then we start building our machines, right? And then and I'm like, look at that, like that's exactly what we do. We just caused all that damage, and we're like, not, like this is make believe, but I'm like, this is happening on our planet right now, right? Is we just cause a lot of damage, and it's because we have this hubris that we can develop and design things better than nature. And the reality is we can't, and we actually should be trying to leverage what nature's already
Learn from nature, leverage it, play with it.
Exactly, and then utilize that, right? It's not replace it.
Right.
And that's kind of the direction we're heading down, right? And I see it because like a lot of the stuff we build, it can't heal itself, right? So solar panels, I'm like, these are dumb because by the time you pay it off, you need a new set because it's broken. Right. Our cars are dumb. Everything, our phones, like everything we have. I'm like, the fact that like,
and we're not very good at recycling.
Yeah. And so think about a human body from that perspective, right? If every single cell just died every time your skin cell just died and it couldn't reutilize any of the building blocks to make more skin cells, then you would just be consuming endlessly, right? Because you have to keep replacing. But that's not how it works, because it can't. That's not sustainable. And so that's the idea that we have to start heading towards. And with Krado, what I'm really trying to do, everything from the ink-free packaging, 3D printing, is paving the way forward. Because, right, if you show that it's possible, you show that it exists, all of a sudden, everyone starts doing it. And that's all I want, right? Because when it comes down to how can I really offset carbon, what is my solution? It's not one entity. It's not one individual that's going to be responsible for doing that. It's going to be an entire systemic change. And it's really these new founders and business builders are building companies with sustainability at the forefront, and it's core to the foundation. And so it's not something that we're just saying, hey, we're every dollar you spend, we're going to go plant a tree. And I'm not planting a tree. I'm just giving this dollar to an organization that's supposedly planting a tree. And whether they do it or not, I don't really know. But that's our sustainability effort, right?
Right.
Like, we got to stop that. That to me is like, that's we're not doing anything other than just pretending to do something. And it's part of this greenwashing problem that's been happening, right? And that's also the other thing we found is when we started reviewing the climate change report by the NCA4, it revealed that we don't actually even know how big the climate change problem is it's because of the lack of data fidelity. We have data gaps, we have biases all over the place. And then once I found that out, I'm like, well, then how are we creating solutions? If you can't even like pin the problem and it's nebulous, then, like, I could just pretend like, oh yeah, I did this, and that year, look, see, it went down, and then I don't know why I didn't do it these other 4 years, but right? And it's like, it has nothing to do with you didn't do anything. And so that is also like, it just, revealing more and more. But so with plants, sorry, what was the original question?
Well, so you're working on expanding this as a service. You're working on expanding this into the sensor space, and you're looking at potentially identifying hardier versions of plants.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about sensor space, and I'll talk about hardier plants. So sensor space, what's really cool is what we're measuring, right? Moisture, temperature, humidity, light. Those are pretty much core measurements you want for any living organism model, right? So terrariums need this. Right. Composting bins need this, right? Worm composting bins need this. Aquariums need this. Anything with a complex ecosystem in it, you need to track these variables. And so for us, it's like, hey, we created this device that could probably work for all of these. We're going to stay focused on plants, but maybe we open source up this part so you can design a new enclosure and you go and collect that data for us.
And you're an order of magnitude cheaper than a lot of the competing sensors.
Correct. Yeah. So a lot of our capabilities is in one sensor, right? And that blows a lot of people's minds because they're like, oh, I just bought a light meter. I'm like, why? Ours is built in. And not only that, it gives you actionable insights, not just this is the value here.
And it's Wi-Fi enabled.
Yeah. So that's the other thing too, right? Is when you have the sensors decoupled, it's a multivariate problem of now the problem I ran into originally, right? Of, okay, I have temperature, I have all these readings. Is this good or bad? What does it mean when I combine it all together? What is that, right? And so that's something if you can figure out, awesome, but most likely you have no idea what to do with any of this data, right? And that's kind of the
data without context gives you no value.
Exactly. Yep. And so we take care of that for you, right? So we take care of all of that for you, and we now are just calculating a value called plant stress, plant health, right? And that's now taking all these multivariables together and giving you that calculation. Right. And that's all you really, at the end of the day, need to know, right? Is this environment good for my tarantula? Is this environment optimal so that my composting is happening at the most efficient levels and the bacteria and everything is in balance, right? You don't really want to sit there and be like, oh, if the temperature's off, you're going to go then and change it. And then what's that going to do? It's going to have a cascading effect with all the other variables, right? Now your humidity is going to change. Your moisture is going to change. And so pulling one lever changes 5 other things, right? And so it's like, and that's actually why people have such a hard time with plant care and other more complex setups is because of that, right? They think it's like, oh, I just do this, should solve that. And it's like, no, now like all these things are linked and it's going to create all these other issues, right? So for me, I just built a planted aquarium and it's the same exact stuff, right? But just at a higher scale because I'm building an ecosystem in a tank
Right.
now. And so now not only are the plants keeping things alive, but the animals that I chose to be in that tank are specific, right? And they're specific because I know exactly like, oh, the ghost shrimp I'm putting in consume algae, but they also are great feeders for this axolotl. And this axolotl will now generate enough waste to generate enough nitrogen for this entire tank. And then now the plants have nitrogen, right? And now the only thing out of balance is the axolotl has just been going crazy hunting all the shrimp, and
Right.
so that little fatty needs to like I need to figure that out of like how do I I thought maybe you have more regulatory behavior on that, but that took me over 4 months to build, and it was simply because I had to start with getting the bacterial ecosystem up and running, right? I
Right.
had to get all that up and running, and then once that's up and running, then you have to balance every single part of
Yeah,
it.
and then you start layering on the food chain.
Yep, and but that's the cool thing is once you start doing that, and so what I loved was I just watched documentary Wildlife, which was about the founder of North Face, and same with Patagonia. So I think Dennis Tompkins. And so they, after they sold that company, they've just been down in South America trying to conserve a lot of the land. And so as they were buying up a lot of land, they finally realized like, oh, conserving's like not enough. Like we need to
Right.
bring back the ecosystem.
Right.
And that's what they did, right? They started bringing the animals back, the whole ecosystem back, and now it's vibrant, right? And they've been able to create 17 national parks out of it. And but the cool thing is once you bring that ecosystem back, all the problems disappear, right? Like
Right.
all the problems you talk about, like especially like with regenerative agriculture, a lot of problems agriculture faces. I'm like, it's fixed, right?
Right.
People have been talking about regenerative agriculture for decades. I don't know why you're not doing it, right? And then all the farmers who switch to it, they're like, wow, all those weird hailstorms are gone.
Right.
All those weird tornadoes are gone. Like I'm no longer getting like weird pests and all, it's all solved and it's all back in balance again.
Right.
And now I'm like, now I have multiple revenue streams beyond
Right.
plants, right? So it's like, I don't know, like seems a win-win-win-win situation there other than just the changing your workflow type situation. So yeah, sensors are applicable in a lot of different areas, and that's where the thing is like IoT really hasn't taken off quite yet, right? So if
Right.
you think about it, we have a lot of sensors, but there's a big data problem too, right?
Right.
Of okay, you have a window sensor, you have a HVAC sensor, you have a light sensor, and then it comes back to that multivariate problem of, well, what do you like? Are they talking to each other?
Is there integration?
Yep.
Is there feedback? Are there learnings? Are there actionable data points?
Exactly. And that's where, new companies are coming in where they're just aggregating all that data. So you can just be like, hey, this office is only in use like these hours of the day. So I'll just turn off everything
Right.
and then I'll make sure it's ready to go when people are using it. Right. And so when I hear smart cities, all I hear is a dumb city that's connected.
Right.
And then even though it's connected, it's still very dumb because it's not integrated, right? So it's not talking to itself. And then the even more dumb part of it is it's missing all these plants. And to me, like plants is a tech, not even a tech, but a solution that you can use that is more resilient than tech, right? Because tech, the issue I have all the time. So my home, all my power lines are above ground, and so anytime
Right.
we have been having all these windstorms or big snowstorms, my power just gets knocked out.
Right.
And what happens? All my tech is useless, right? Like I could be away, and then all of a sudden my phone just blows up because every single device I have connected is now disconnected. And I'm like, cool. So, and then I have no access, right? And the whole system is broken at that point. And it all resets itself, like all my lights and everything. And I'm like,
Right.
oh my gosh. When like plants don't need tech, like they don't need Wi-Fi, they don't need power, they don't need energy. And for me, it's like, well, they can be a good secondary air system. They can be good air scrubbers. They could be good air monitors, right? Like the second I can get plants to glow different colors depending on their responses, I now have like this plant will always tell me if there's too much carbon monoxide, right?
Right.
Not some battery that's beeping and it's like, oh, if this battery dies, I'm dead.
Right.
And that's also the same type of like solution that needs to be for space. I'm like, if space is like even more critical, where if your power gets knocked out, you cannot have to rely on tech. Like
You have
you're dead.
minutes.
Yeah, and you need other secondary systems that are
resilient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's where we are with that. And then with the hardier plants, yeah. So here's the craziest stat: is there's over 400,000 plant species in the world. We've only studied 31,000 of them.
Wow. Less than 10%.
Yep. And that's today, right? And the unfortunate part is we're also losing a lot of those plant species
Right.
because of just the destructive behavior that we have. And we already know the power of plants, right? We've created medicine from them, we've created
Right.
all this, but somewhere along the way, we lost that connection to them and understanding that, hey, we should be studying these more.
Right.
And so we're losing plants at a rate that I'm like, we're not even gonna be like, those will be gone forever, right?
Right.
And there's gonna be maybe no way to get it back, or maybe one day there's gonna be someone with a seed somewhere, but that's the hope with Krado is our system will be able to find it, right? And or we'll be able to study it at a faster pace because we're no longer relying on a research grant to do it. We're no longer relying on an ag tech reason to do it, right?
It will just fall out of the data.
Yeah.
And so not only are you potentially helping understand these plants in their optimal growing situation, but you're also following uh, the varietal speciation of these plants, of a subset of a traditional plant that happens to be much happier in the dry environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're looking to identify things that would be overlooked and then have a new purpose.
Yes, correct. Or the better part is we don't have to develop these plants in a lab. So if I already find a plant that is out there that's more drought tolerant because it's adapted, right? And that's the key is
And the data will just bring that to the top of the list, and you'll be like, oh, here's a subspecies of a plant, and this one, at so and so's house is something that we should pay more attention to.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh, we found out what was the plant that someone was studying at BYU? They were trying to get it to grow in sand in Peru. Quinoa. It's quinoa. So over 2 decades ago, someone was like, hey, I think I figured out how to grow quinoa in sand. And so actually one of our friends went and bought a ton of land in Peru that was sand.
Okay.
And because he's like, I'm going to own the biggest quinoa farm, right? And today still has yet to be figured out. And he sold all that useless land because he couldn't grow anything there. And that's like the point I'm trying to make, and the problem, right, is yes, a scientist has been trying to do it, and 20 years later still hasn't quite figured it out, and it's because he's trying to control everything in a lab, right?
Right.
When out there might be a quinoa plant that just has figured it out somewhere.
And you just got to find it.
We just have to find it, and that's the key of Krado is we can now have the ability to find it.
Very cool.
And if we find it, then the plant's ready. And then we bring it to lab, and then we can duplicate it, we can replicate it, we can make more clones of itself, and we've just shaved off at least 10, 15 years of...
So one of the low-cost benefits that you envision for Krado is identifying attractive traits in plants and, getting access to that plant.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And not having to build it in a lab, because that's where all the costs sink into, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, right now it takes over 15 years to develop a new crop seed.
Great.
And the failure rate is 50%. And so those are pretty bad numbers, right? Of like, okay, you're saying, and that's also why, if you look at, right, you come from the VC world of if you invest all this money and the timeline is 15 plus years and then it fails, we're probably not going to do that again.
Yep.
And that's bad because then the money just starts drying up, right? And so we're actually starting to see that now happening with alternative meats. The alternative meat business model isn't doing so great. And so I'm seeing them drop like flies because VCs are no longer propping them up. And that's not great because it's like that is actually the right path, but the process is what's broken,
Right.
Not the idea, right? And so, but that means no one's going to invest in alternative meats anymore. And so that means what? Like
Yeah, that shouldn't be a dead end. It just means that, something needs to change.
Yeah. And I'm seeing that happen with vertical farms too. Vertical farms are starting to close doors and same, right? Because it has, and the economics there is not it's not a high revenue generating business yet,
Right.
right? And especially here stateside where land is very expensive, and we have a lot of space. It's even harder for those to really take off, right?
Sure.
But it's not to say it's not a good direction to go. It's just, yeah, like we have to think about the economics a little bit differently. But the fact that they're, shutting doors and money's not going to those as much, also it's like, oh man, like this is what's happening. This is what happened with plants, right? Is same exact thing. And then finally it's like, okay, we're only putting in $1 billion now into plant research. And I'm like, it should be like, because we put $63 billion into biotech research. I'm like, that should be flipped, right? Like, where do you think biotech comes from anyway? It's like from plants.
Right. So this has been incredibly informative for me to spend more time with you. Let's tell folks how to get in touch. So you've got multiple areas of engagement. How can people find you?
Sure. So this will be on YouTube, and I will give you all the links
Okay.
to access Krado, my LinkedIn, and so yeah, it's just you'll be able to find me there.
Sounds perfect. Eric, thanks for your time. And thank you all for joining us. This is episode 1 of Al Insights, brought to you by Momentum Finance. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. How we do?